Hello, and welcome to the first inaugural episode of Lay It on the Table, part of the Geek and Southern podcast network, if that is even such a thing, because this is only our second thing that we're putting out there. So I guess it's a network if you have more than one. I don't know, but I am Joe Mahaffey, one of your hosts. I am joined today by my partner in crime, somebody I've known for way many more years than I would care to admit or even remember, James Englehart. James, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. It's a lovely day here. I think we're both kind of close to where we met, physically anyway, although we're both far away from each other now.
Yeah, you're a lot closer than I am.
That's probably true.
Yeah. But anywho. Cool. And we are recording this in April 2022, and neither of us look bleary-eyed from staying up watching basketball because we did not go to a basketball school that would be in the Final Four.
Nope, not even close.
Yeah. One day we have aspirational hopes, but not today.
They've gone to the big dance a couple of times,
they
but
have.
Never made a deep run into it. So, which is fair.
And for those of you who don't even know what school we're talking about Wofford College, which is not Duke or Chapel Hill. So now that we've established that, I think we're in good shape. Okay, so this is not the game that you wanted to talk about, though. When we come to a lay it on the table, I don't think you expect to hear something about basketball. But because this is our inaugural episode, James and I have been talking about this for a number of months about how to do something a little bit different in the podcast space when it comes to board games. And I think we're going to be feeling our way through it. And I think that you all, as a part of our audience, will have an opportunity to even contribute to where we go sometimes. And I think that'll be useful. But today we're going to go through just a couple different segments that I think where we hope you might find interesting. But I think before we get there, I think it's important for the listeners to really understand who are they hearing from and what is their origin story, if you will. Everybody loves a good origin story from all the different DC and Marvel comics, I suppose. But everybody loves a good origin story. And I think it would be useful to kind of unpack our respective origin stories as it relates to games. So James, why don't we start with you? Because I think you're a lot more, I don't want to say accomplished, but I might say more learned in this space. So let's start with you and just sort of see where that goes.
Okay, so the first thing you need to know is that I was bitten by a radioactive dye when I was 10, so that kept me rolling along, and that's why they called me Pip as I grew up. I think for a lot of people, you grow up playing family games. I guess some people don't, but like a lot of people, I did. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. We always had, a couple boxes, classic, played a lot of Clue, chess with my dad, some classic card games. And as you get into and picked up D&D back in the 80s, right about the height of the Satanic Panic.
Yeah, that's where we all had that on ramp.
Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to play D&D, although I, and I guess my parents are hearing this now, snuck out and played D&D with friends, but also we were allowed to play like Traveler and Gamma World. There was a Top Secret, that was one. And then I also ran a, sort of a proto LARP, I guess, called the Assassination Game. Although we had a version of it called Killer. And so ran that for my high school cohort. And that was pretty fun. And then, college and girls happened and there was a lot less gaming, although a little bit at Wofford. Played a weird, delightful board game called Ubi, and we can maybe talk about that at some point. It's a geography game.
Yeah.
Sort of geography trivia. That was super fun. And then, games weren't really part of my life for a while. And, in the early 2000s, going to grad school, had a bunch of friends who liked to have game nights, and they had some RPGs and some, console games and card games. And I said, well, I want to contribute to this, so I'll have to find a niche, and stumbled into board games, found a game of Carcassonne at a local cafe, and spent 2 hours trying to wrap my head around how this game would work on a 4-page rule book for Kark, and finally figured it out. Just delighted by it. Found it was just a blast to play, and started looking for other resources. Found early version of Board Game Geek. Started listening to a couple of early podcasts, and just got sucked into it. And that's been 15, 20 years now or so. So and what I've done recently is I'm teaching at Furman University and using board games and tabletop games as a frame for my first year writing students. So we're reading articles about this and having them think about arguments based around tabletop games, which is a lot of fun for me. I don't think they necessarily, it's a class, so they're not quite as stoked as I would like them to be, but still, it's a lot of fun to think about games in those ways.
Well, what I love about that is, this is one of those things I think as we develop as a society, there's always the flattening of certain creative mediums. And I think we saw it first with magazines. Initially there were all these very generalist magazines out there like Life and Time and things like that. And then as we kind of got into the 70s and 80s, it became very flat, where all of a sudden there was a magazine for everybody.
Yep.
You could find, I want to watch goth horror in, Mexico magazine. I'm being ridiculous. I don't even know if that exists. It probably does. If it does, please put it in any kind of comments that might be out there, because I'd be curious to see that. But anyway, my point is this. I think even book publishing and creative outlets have become very flat and accessible. And I think that, and in some instances have become, I don't want to use the word tropey, because that is not fair to the good content that gets put out there. But my point is what I'm meandering around to, and hopefully you guys are getting ADD Joe today, which is full of coffee and full of rambling thoughts. So this could be a problem. Is that I love that this using a board game and game theory as a creative outlet is a different way to exercise that creative muscle and get away from the tropes of the butler did it, or, this is the formula that by page 35 they have to meet, and by page 100 they have to have a fight, and by page 206 they're back together. I think I just described the Hallmark movie metaphor.
Oh yeah, no, I think so.
But anyway, I just love that that's a thing, and I maybe we should in a future episode maybe talk about sort of how that's unpacking for your class and kind of what you're seeing there. But anyway. That's very
well. They're fascinated. They, most of them don't know anything about the sort of hobby board games, right, and sort of larger world. Most of them have come across Catan, so they've played that a couple times. And Cards Against Humanity are super, which is not really a niche, not really a hobby thing, but they're super excited about that and love the idea of like the subversiveness that they can do with their friends and say terribly naughty things. And they enjoy that sort of stuff. But they have that same kind of everybody's got Clue, Scrabble, Candyland, Monopoly, and they never play Monopoly with the full actual rules, and it's nobody does. I don't even think people really understand what the rules are. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah, so that's super interesting. And they're starting to realize, and the ways that when you really look closely at pretty much anything, in this case board games, you see so much other stuff. Who is this marketed to? How are they appealing to people? What happens when you play a board game? What kind of, one of the things I like about games, of course, is that it's novelty that is, in a box, and you can keep playing the same game and it'll still be different. And that's, I think, a really compelling thing for me anyway about games.
So as I think about, your origin story, and I kind of juxtapose that with mine, I always feel like, gosh, I have always felt in my life that I've been a late bloomer in many respects, or you ever feel like, you were raised in a certain time, but then you realize, boy, if things were so different. So my engagement with the game is I'm the youngest of 5 kids, and we're all 3 years apart. And when you're the youngest of 5 kids that are all 3 years apart, it's a lot like being an only child. And what I mean by that is by the time you're really coming up, everybody's out of the house. you
right.
know, and your parents are like, hey, we've raised 5 kids. We can go travel now. Here are the keys to the house. You know, we trust you not to have a party or anything because, you know, we've met your friends. That did not always work the way they thought that would, but that's a different thing. And I know that they're not listening to this. So this is
I'm glad to hear that though. That's an important,
but so, you know, to your point, when the D&D came around, the satanic panic, I mean, we were raised in the Episcopal Church. We were like, oh yeah, that's that other denomination. I won't disparage other denomination.
No, mine were evangelical Christians. So they went into it.
Didn't have a problem with it, but at the same time, there wasn't what we would call today intersectionality between the gaming and the faith pieces, and we'll talk about that at some point because that's actually something I'm involved in right now. But anyway, so long story short, I come to D&D, you know, or advanced D&D because, you know, we were enlightened back in those days, and the thing is that D&D was a very different game. Back when it first came out. I mean, it was, you know, we called the dice math rocks for a reason because you really had to understand the mathematics of the mechanics to really find effective play. And for somebody like me who was ADD, I'm not saying that I was dysgraphic, but if you look at my handwriting from that time frame, it was very it was something that I would struggle with. And so aspects of the game were really not as accessible to me in the medium it was presented at the time. I did have some friends that were keen on playing, and we played a couple of campaigns, and, you know, we did some things, but there were aspects of it that were just a challenge. And then of course, you know, we had the normal family board game stuff, the Monopoly, the Scrabbles, the Clue, and it was always funny. My sister was like, Clue was her game. She loved Clue, you know, and I was always like, oh, let's play Monopoly, you know. And, but even there, those were younger years because, again, they moved out of the house. Right. And I had friends in the neighborhood. We'd go play, you know, board games at their house, but there were all those, you know, this was the era of some of the more tropey games, like, or not tropey games, maybe gimmicky games like Hungry Hippo and, you know, Rock'em Sock'em Robots. I know it's not really a game, but
that stuff is still out there now.
Very nostalgic.
The one with the mouth guard and all of that sort of mass market. It's and we just goofy,
and we loved Mousetrap just because you wanted to get to the end and watch the whole, you know, mechanic thing roll like you were watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang's Kitchen or something. It was, you know, pretty exciting. But anyway, so then, you know, high school and college for me in gaming were just, there was really no significant intersection just because growing up in the 80s, you know, nerd culture was not necessarily a positive thing in the 80s. That was, you know, if you just look at the movie Revenge of the Nerds, you can kind of see there was a reason why that movie struck a chord because that was very much what it was like. And I think those of us who were in that world we're really trying to find ways to divest ourselves of that so that we could be seen a little bit differently, because that's just what you do in high school. You're looking for identity, you're looking for acceptance. And, you know, this was back before, you know, nobody was taking pictures and posting them everywhere and all this other stuff. I mean, it was a completely different space. Talk about an analog world. It was an analog world.
Very much.
So anyway, normal stuff, you know, got married, had kids, played the games with the kids. You know, we talked about Candyland. We were big into a lot of like the Harry Potter movie trivia games and stuff like that. We still have those, like the Scene-Its. Do you remember the Scene-It games?
Oh yeah.
Yep. So we still have those around here. I don't know if we have a DVD player anymore, but you know, and just stuff like that. And of course, two girls, you go through the Barbie and the Disney stuff pretty quick. And I think where it really begins to pick up for me is, I was blessed to grow up with two daughters that discovered Harry Potter as they were happening. You know, there was none of this. Right. Oh, you know, it was real time. We were reading the books. We were anticipating the next book. We were going to the Barnes and Noble at midnight, or the Borders at midnight for the book drop. And there were people everywhere. And this is, for me anyway,
some in costumes. That was fun.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And gosh, I remember the one book release was at the Barnes and Noble at Carolina Place Mall in Pineville, North Carolina. And there was also a Hot Topic there, and all the ladies from Hot Topic were out there in their goth attire, and they were just, ginning up the crowd. It was fantastic. My wife and I, the girls, we just loved it. In fact, I ran into somebody that I hope to have on this podcast really soon, and I'll save that story for another time. But anyway, so I'm getting to where we are. So fast forward, kids grow up, they're out of the house. I actually did a stint. I'll call it a stint. 20 years working with Boy Scouts.
Ah, okay.
Camping in the woods and skills and such. And fast forward a little bit, one of my Eagle Scouts, Jordan Robinson, great artist, great guy. He lives in Greensboro, North Carolina these days. He's got a really creative situation going on. Anyway, nice. He was having an art show up at Get Some Game, which is a store in Charlotte. That's a game store, okay. But there's also a coffee shop. There's a comic shop. It's one of those kind of co-op kind of buildings. So honestly, I don't know if everything is still there that was there then. But anyway, so we decided we're going to go and support Jordan. And my wife and I would go up to Get Some Game. And honestly, I hadn't thought about games in forever. This was about, I'm going to say 4 years ago. So this is how new I am to this reboot here. So we go in, and I walk in and I see the dice.
Oh yeah,
the bag of dice, and I'm like, and it just sparked. And of course, we supported Jordan in his art.
Suddenly, you turned into a crow. Just let me get all the sparkly things.
It was very much like that. I mean, it's like I thought about it, and I got a little obsessive because that's unfortunately my personality works that way. I get obsessed about something. Or I get inspired by something and it can become obsessive. It's like that itch. I always liken it to that Big Bang Theory episode where Sheldon is trying to explain to Leonard the itch in his brain that comes from the fact that he did not return the movie 10 years ago. And it wasn't that he, it's just this obsessive thing. And I understand that because there's an itch you have to scratch in that regard. So long story short, I didn't, unfortunately, for the folks that Get Some Game, just because they're not in my local area. I mean, they're not in my neighborhood. I didn't really scratch that itch there, so to speak. However, I did discover. It's
good not to scratch all the itches in public, Joe. That's
fair, particularly these days where there's a camera everywhere. So long story, even longer probably. So we discovered in downtown Pineville, which is where we live, Carolina Tabletop Games. And I went in there and I just started talking to the workers that were working there, one of whom, Shane, is in our game. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, I'm sure. And I just kind of started this, I want to do D&D. And ironically, it was just me getting obsessed about that I began to discover the things like Critical Role and High Rollers and Man Shorts, which is a great comedic channel if you like D&D humor as well as drunk humor. Discover all these things. And then that led to, on the one side, planning out this campaign that predates the one that we're in now. But at the same time, we discovered Wingspan.
Wingspan, yes.
And so this is that. I mean, we're discovering games right around the time that Wingspan is released. And ironically, I bought Wingspan as a joke.
Really?
Yeah, because I was in the store and Shane goes, "Hey, we got Wingspan in for this family, the Stouts, because they'd pre-ordered it." And I'm like, well, and I knew the Stouts, and I was like, well, I'm going to buy it so they can't have it. And it was a joke, and it was a thing. And so later they had a copy of Wingspan that somebody had reserved. And I said, did somebody ever buy that? Because I'm kind of curious about it. And they said, well, hold on a minute. They picked up the phone and called and said, yeah, we found it somewhere else. So I bought it. And I brought it home, and it stayed in shrink wrap for like a week and a half. And then my wife and I, we went to the game store. Carolina Tabletop Games is now euphemistically always referred to as the game store.
Sure.
And one of the folks there, Ian, was working there at the time, and Ian sat down and taught my wife and I how to play Wingspan, and we were hooked.
Oh yeah.
And the whole engine building mechanic, etc. And so those two things set in motion my new passion for games. And we've built up a collection in the last 3-4 years of games. The pandemic has helped with that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's sort of my origin story of coming to games, where get back into D&D and then discover the whole board game element, and discovering that it's so different. I mean, they've been saying that we're in a golden age of board games, and I believe it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm going to kind of put a pin in that there, because there's so much more to my story that I think is going to come out organically. But I want to come back to you for a second, because, one of the things that has really inspired me or impressed me, maybe both. Well, actually, I'm going to put a pin in that, because I want to take the origin story back to how we got reconnected, because this is all back to Wingspan, and I think it ties into where I want to go next. So one day, I joined this Facebook group about Wingspan, and I posted something. I don't even remember what I posted.
I don't either.
And I get a comment from James Englehart, and it's like, Joe, is this you? And it was just so brilliant. It's like, oh my gosh, here is where you and I get reconnected after what, 25, 30 years? Yeah. I don't know. And that just sort of set this kind of back and forth. And it was because of Wingspan. That brought that together. And so I began through that interaction, began learning a little bit more about, you and your experience with games, just through back and forth through chatting.
Yep.
And then somewhere along the way, you brought up the Spiel Foundation. And for those of you who don't know, the Spiel Foundation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to making the world a more playful place. And I don't want to steal any thunder around that, but I'd love to know, how are you involved with those guys and gals and folks? Got to get all my pronouns right here. And no offense to anybody. And just tell me about that.
Sure. Well, I mean, so talking about those early podcasts, the Spiel was one of them. It was the Spiel on board games and the Dice Tower when Vassal was still in Korea.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know how I don't know how he managed to make time work to do all of that good stuff. But, so I started listening to the Spiel, probably in the early double digits of its run, and went back. So I've listened to pretty much all of those episodes, and a couple of times I would write in, and they had different segments and sometimes I'd be able to send a little something to them. But then I was working as a acquisitions editor at the University of Illinois Press, and I was working on trade books, which are so not academic, not scholarly books, but ones that you'd want to pick up, as opposed to, something that starts out the war of, colon, blah, 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 so it's, 18 words long for a title, that kind of thing, and with dates and all of that. So, and I was said, well, I know Stephen Conway, who's the host who's been there the whole time. He's from Indianapolis, is a big sort of Hoosier identified guy. And I was like, so, maybe there's a sort of games of the Midwest, right? Because there's, of course, D&D started. It's called Gen Con because of Lake Geneva.
Right.
So D&D started in the Midwest. All of these other game companies, Glass Toys was in Chicago for many, many years. They gave us things like Boggle and stuff. And the original version of Operation and all of these, just lots of different stuff. Aggravation comes from somewhere in Wisconsin, I believe. So I thought, well, I'll reach out to Stephen Conway. I don't really know the man. Send him a half dozen emails over a 15-year period or something. So, but we'll see what happens. So sent him a short note. He got back to me, said, yeah, that sounds like an interesting project. So we set up a phone call that was supposed to be an hour and like half an hour or something, and went on for like an hour and a half. And we just sort of kept in touch. And then when I left the press, and I was doing some freelance work, and he was like, well, the Spiel Foundation needs some research on these things and some of that thing. And so I was doing some work with them, just thinking about fundraising and all of those sorts of things. And and we've become friends. He has a sort of Friday night game meetup. And so my wife and I have been part of that group. they've been watching Emerson grow up on Zoom every
That's awesome.
once a week or so.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of got involved with them, and talking with Stephen and Doug, and yeah, it's a great, they just went through. He's been working hard to do these game bundle programs, which they get games donated. They put the 5 games in a box, and they open it up, punch it, put them in baggies or whatever, organize the pieces and label them so that when it goes to, senior centers or nursing homes or children's hospitals or boys and girls clubs, women and domestic abuse shelters, all these different places, all you have to do is open up the box and everything is there out the way it needs to be. And you can kind of look through, and they're always looking for rules, games that have pretty accessible rule sets, so that, all you have to do is open the box and go. Right. And so they had gotten several thousand, tens of thousands of games, I want to say, and managed to get like thousands and thousands of game bundles out over the last 6 weeks, 2 months, something like this. And it's just been fun to watch and hear about all of the people who are getting these games. And I think this is, part of the whole impetus for the Spiel too, is to bring that joy and playfulness into the world, and thinking about games as a place that, because you play a game, right? Play is right there in the description of how you engage it. So getting people together, getting people to, engage across the table and have some fun and try something different. And they've just done, I think, a fantastic job doing that, and really kind of ramping up into this next stage of development for the foundation as well as the podcast.
What I love about what they're doing, I mean, gosh, children's hospitals, senior centers, shelters, halfway houses, boys and girls clubs, schools, libraries, and even prisons. I mean, it's pretty amazing. I bought some coffee recently from Many Worlds Tavern, and they're really cool because they have a number of charitable foundations that they support in the gaming arena, and Spiel Foundation just happens to be one of them. And so I was able to place an order and then, convey that. It just occurred to me, given what Shane does, one of our players in our D&D game, I bet her the organizations she works with might be a perfect target for that organization. Yep. Just throwing that out there. We'll have to sort of talk to her about that at some point, maybe. Don't know.
Yeah.
So speaking of Shane, I'm sorry, I'm trying to multitask here, and I'm doing a really poor job of it, trying to make the OBS look a little nicer. It just means that the video is going to look really wonky at some point. Sure. Anyway, so let's talk about the D&D, because, we embarked on a D&D adventure together about a year ago this time. Mm-hmm. And we started with a one-shot. I love to do one-shots. And this whole Geek and Southern thing, I think, was sort of the hook. I think obviously it's an unabashed homage to Geek and Sundry. I don't think we can get around acknowledging that. But I think the vision of it was pretty much, not everybody in the game are involved with us is from the South, but we all live here. And I was thinking about, I had always wanted to do Curse of Strahd. Strahd has always been a fascinating character for me, even though there was a period of time when I wasn't necessarily into gaming. I certainly saw the books, the Ravenloft series, right. And so doing that, but everybody, it seemed there was, I wanted to do something that could be online, not live necessarily, unless we built an audience, which we'll see. Something that could be fun, that could just be about us. I think the opening segue says we are not voice actors, with no offense to Critical Role. They've made things like this possible, and I love them personally. So that's not a bad thing. I'm just trying to acknowledge what our weaknesses are, perhaps. But I wanted to do Strahd, but everybody was doing it. It seemed, High Rollers had a version, D&D Beyond has a version. I think Wizards of the Coast has got a version. Everybody's doing Curse of Strahd. But we decided to do it as if it took place in Appalachia. And I think that's been kind of fun for me, because it's been interesting to me. I'm not going to talk about the game and all that stuff because this is not designed to be a shameless plug about that. But what's been interesting to me is the chemistry and the social dynamic that is unpacked. I mean, most of the party, everybody knows everybody through me. I think I am the intersection of how everybody in that game knows each other, with
except for my daughter, who
fair. But
met her in a whole different setting.
She was a later edition, but that's totally fair. But you get what I'm saying. You know, these people came together, had no really previous experience together other than you and I, and me and everybody else, except I didn't know Rose.
Oh,
Rose was new to me from that one shot that we did at Christmas time in 2020. And of course I didn't know Wendy. But it's been really interesting to watch this group of people remotely get to know each other. But it's also been interesting to watch it evolve. And what I mean by that is we're a year into it, and I feel like more recently the RP aspects have come to the forefront, in the sense that other people are feeling their way through their characters. And I think it's been a really interesting form of self-expression. I don't know how you feel about that. I mean, you're obviously playing, and you're getting to play with your daughter. So let's talk about that. How do you feel about that? Do you think I'm right in that assessment, or do you think I'm just kind of getting some happy ears based on being the DM?
No, I think we really have, like, because as you pointed out, I didn't know anybody before we sat down. And so there's this kind of awkward space. You're like, well, who are you? What are we doing? I don't know how this is going to go.
Right.
And I think, we had a couple of people who were, had a long history of doing D&D and other RPGs. I was in a Pathfinder group for a while. And so, some of us knew kind of how this was going to go, and it felt like a couple of others really didn't and were kind of working their way into it. But also just the ways that we're, I think, and this is an interesting thing about games, right? Because the ways that you play really reveal a lot about your character as a human being, right? What do you do? How do you respond to something when the stakes are artificially high, but in reality low? Like, how do you react? And that's a fascinating thing to watch, and a lot of fun to, a year into it, just kind of know who's going to do what, how it's going to go. And part of it's also understanding, like, okay, when, if we've got, one of the cannons, Hal's character blowing shit up from far away, great. If that doesn't happen, what's the next step? How do people, move into different positions? And it's just kind of the way that the tactics and strategy have evolved as well. But also the ways that we're expecting, if we walk into some place new, that the bard is going to start chatting up everybody and sort of expecting that and just having a good time watching that unfold. And that's been great. And playing with Wendy has been hilarious. She's a 7th grader. So she has her own little D&D group at her middle school. And it is, from her tales, quite chaotic. They're middle schoolers. They're just running around beating the hell out of stuff. And whatever weird stuff they can come up with, that's what they do. And so but because she's playing with a bunch of adults who really know how the game goes, they kind of turn to her and say, okay, so, are we doing this right? And so, but it's been fun to watch her playing with us and sort of rein in her chaotic 7th grade tendencies, even though a couple of times, she's let it run loose, and sometimes it helped the party out quite a bit by doing that. So that's been fun, and it's just fun to watch her interact with y'all too, and see who she sort of becomes without me there.
Oh my gosh, when she started chasing, was it the imp in Argon Vostald? And that, what I loved about that is, for me as a DM, I learned a long time ago, you have to plan in broad strokes. You can't plan in detail because you never know where the party is going to go. You have to be able to adapt and move. And that's what, first of all, I just have to give a shout out to the folks at D&D Beyond and Roll20 and all the virtual tabletop content folks out there, Foundry and others, Dungeon Fog, everybody that's not currently sponsoring this conversation, just because as much as I miss being in person through the pandemic, and with this group, it's kind of hard because of the remoteness of, you're in Greenville, we're in Charlotte, some people are in Virginia, Wendy's in Illinois, it's really hard to be in person. But the tools that have made this so successful, and of course our friends at Zoom, yes. I love that, because that level of access to content has made it easy for me to adapt and move for you guys. It's like when you roll the die and you have to face these guys or that guys, I can set up an encounter really, really fast. I have to worry about, do I have a million minis, and all of that stuff. So that for me has been, from a planning perspective, allows me to be more versatile. I like to say that, I used to say that some things are like classical music, where you have to follow the notes exactly as how they're written. So much in board gaming, specifically D&D, is jazz, where you just get to
it's improv. Yeah,
exactly. And so for me, that's been a ton of fun, and seeing where that is going to go. I mean, you talk about the Bard. I mean, we finally got to have some RP there. I think you and I, because we grew up doing theater, you more so than me, but doing theater in school together, I think we're much more comfortable with that whole banter, if you will. The hardest part for me is figuring out, what accent did I use for that person the last time?
Yes.
It's a variation of a Southern accent, but I don't know which one. And that's why I stick by the "we are not voice actors" thing.
Which is true.
But it's been a lot of fun. And so I think that's been kind of cool, because it's funny where I walked into the Home Depot the other day, and I was talking to one of the assistant managers there, and she said to me, "Do you have a podcast or a YouTube channel on D&D?" And I was like, maybe.
Oh, wow.
And it's not that she had discovered it. She had heard about it through one of her coworkers we had kind of stumbled into this discussion. Wow. And she was telling me about her son, and how her son is, a teenager, and he's trying to get into this, and he doesn't have friends that are interested in playing. And so, it's an interesting conversation piece. I find that when I bring up D&D, so many people are curious about this social interaction, this social experiment. I think it's sort of been driven by the pandemic, in the sense that we've been socially isolated for so long, and we want a sense of adventure. So anyway,
well, and I think that that's sort of the ways that particularly D&D becomes theater of the mind, as we like to talk about it. And it lets you, literally take on a different skin and try to imagine yourself into an entirely different place. And that's just, it's part of being human is imagining ourselves in different places. It's how we think about the future. It's how we imagine the past, that separate country. So I love that we've got these role-playing games that let us, with a little bit of codification. So here's, in case things go sideways, here's the chart to look up. But it gives you that freedom to explore. And I've got a colleague, another instructor at Furman, who's like, yep, getting ready to run. They were doing the Mines of Phandelver. So she's like, this is I'm just now learning how to DM. Like, okay. So this stuff is everywhere.
It's funny. A coworker of mine said to me the other day, she goes, "Hey, my husband is a nerd." And I'm like, "Oh, so he's a good guy, right?" She's like, "Yes." And so am I, sort of, kind of. And we're thinking about, I want a DM, and we're going to get a little game together. And I said, but she's like, she's very intimidated about being the DM, because I think there's this sense that you have to be an expert in all the rules. And the answer is you don't. There are plenty of times where I'm letting you guys course correct me on the rules. I make the final decision, but I'll look up the objection or the thought based on what people are saying, because it's hard to know everything at once. And so what I offered to her is, I said, "Look, I'll be happy to do a one shot with you and your husband and your friends, just to kind of show you the mechanics of how easy it is, and then say, here are the keys. kind of get them, kind of do their session 0 for them.
Sure.
And send them off on it. Well, I think, we can certainly talk a lot about D&D in conversations like this, and I'm sure we're going to come back to it, but I just kind of wanted to use that as an intersection of sort of kind of what we're experiencing together as we go through this. I will say this. I have made a number of NPCs in the different campaigns that I've done, and I've started playing Elden Ring on the computer, and I decided to build a character based on one of my NPCs. So I'm kind of curious to see what that's like to bring somebody that I really brought as a support person to now try to play in an online environment, which was kind of fun. All right, so we'll move on from that. I did want to kind of move into a segment that I like to call "What's on the Table." And I don't know what you guys are playing right now, but I know we've got a couple of games on the table. So why don't we start with you? What's on your table this week?
Well, it's been busy. We've just gotten past spring break and heading into the last bit of the semester, so it's kind of a little crazy. But we managed to get an older small box game called Fidelitas by Philip DeBerry, and I think Katarsky is the other one. Jason Katarsky, yep, and Philip DeBerry. It's little small card game where you've got 10 different spaces on cards that are set out in front of you, and you play cards to either side of that. And every time you play a card, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, but you move other things around, and you're trying to make them sort of line up in different patterns so you can score a mission card. And mission cards have different points on them. First person to 10 ends the game, and then you round out the rounds. So everybody has the same number of turns, and it's. I had picked it up when I was traveling. One of the things that I used to do when I would travel is find a local game shop, because that would always take you away from the tourist sections of town. None of the tourists go and pick up board games, so that would send me out to neighborhoods and see people, and I try to pick up these little games. And it has really cute art, and it seemed like it was kind of light and could be fun. And it is. And it's fairly chaotic. It's very tactical. There's no strategy that you can really do, because the cards are going to keep moving. The setup is going to shift around a lot. And there's a whole lot of luck of the draw, both in terms of your fulfillment cards, the mission cards, and in terms of the cards that you can play. So it's pretty light, but doesn't outstay its welcome, super quick. And we had a good time playing that last night. Laura was like, "What are we doing the first 2 rounds?" And then managed to kick my ass. So there you go.
Yeah, it's funny how that works. So what my wife and I typically do, Dale and I will typically pick a game on Sunday that's going to be on our table for the week, and we'll play it on Sunday, and then we kind of play it through the week, and then we kind of put it up on maybe Saturday, and then take a break, and then we come back to it, pick up something new. So in the past couple of weeks, we've done. We started with Libertalia. The new one from Stonemaier, Libertalia, Winds of Galecrest.
Right.
Paolo Mori and Lamaro Smith are the designers on that, and of course it's a reboot of the 2012 game, and they've really made it much more accessible, much more culturally accessible, and really kind of I never played the old game, so I'm really giving you an opinion based on what I've read. But what I love about it is we like games that are accessible for 2-player. And there's some out there that have like a 2-player mechanic that the robotic aspect of it just doesn't work. Like
there's an awkward third player or something. Yeah.
The tale of in between the castles of you know which one I'm referring to. I can't.
Yes.
It's not coming off. I want to say in between 2 cities, but then there's the
castles of Mad King Ludwig, and then they've got that Ludwig, sort of between 2 castles. Yep. Yeah,
between the 2 castles of Mad King Ludwig, the variant, the 2-player variant there is very challenging for us. It hurts my brain as it is. You can tell by the way I can't say it. But Libertalia, they've done a really nice mechanic there that makes it really accessible in the 2-player game. The one thing it does though, my wife likes games where you don't have to be mean to win.
Yes. Yep.
And that's one of the things she likes about Wingspan. I mean, you're not hurting me if you're playing your game. And Parks is that way, and and other games. But when you get into a game like Root or even a game like Libertalia, where there's a mean element, it's like the saber comes out. She's like, I really don't want to do this. And I'm like, I'm going to do it to you. So go ahead. So that was us. And then we did Canvas, which of course is Jeff Chen and Andrew Nerger and Luan Nguyen, the artist. And so the reason we're doing Canvas, I know it's been out for a while, but the expansion just came out. I'm going to pull this out.
Okay.
So the original Canvas, it's a box.
Yes.
Beautiful box.
Yes.
You can hang it on
Those
your
beautiful
wall.
Transparent cards.
You can hang it on the wall.
I think it's hilarious.
And then the expansion came out, and you have this
nice
complete painting that comes together very nicely. And the expansion on this really steps up the game, and it doesn't add so many new rules that you can't. It's very accessible. Right. If you know the core mechanic, this just naturally fits in. And I love, a lot of expansions may change the tenor of the game, like the Wingspan expansions have made the forest so not part of your strategy anymore because there's other ways to get resources,
Right.
Whereas most people fill out the forest too so they can get more food and stuff. So anyway, but that's what's on our table right now is Canvas.
Nice.
And I don't know what we're going to do this week. We have a few things on the Shelf of Shame, which is a board game that I've purchased that's still in shrink wrap.
Yes.
And so we're making a conscious effort to pull those off, open them up, punch them out, and play them. Because at some point I got to figure out, are there games in our collection? Because we're pushing, I know we're nowhere near you. We're pushing 100 games.
Nice.
We've got a couple of Kalaxes full, and for IKEA customers and game lovers, you'll know what that means. And I've got the big 4x4 Kalax, so that I actually put on wheels, which is kind of interesting.
Nice.
I should probably do a how-to video on how I did that. Anyway, I got to figure out a point. Are there games in our collection that need to be either, I don't mean retired, but I kind of hate having games that are not getting played. And I got to find, maybe there are organizations around here that are a good spot for the games. So I don't necessarily want to sell them to make money off of them. I kind of feel like that would be hard to do. So anyway, so that's what's on our table.
Nice.
But I'll keep you posted on what hits the table next. I do have a few Kickstarters that I'm waiting on, and I think that's been the scourge of most people's existence of the pandemic as well, just because of the production things. But the things
and shipping, all the stuff,
right. But the last 3 games that I've backed were Tang Gardens Seasons.
Nice.
We love Tang Garden. It's an amazing game. In fact, I went ahead and when I backed it, I just backed the complete set because there are certain games that we have that I love to have a backup copy of. Because we have backups of the Wingspans, we have backups of Isle of Cats, and now we have backups of Tang Garden. We've also backed Trekking Through History, which is the trekking series, Trekking Through National Parks, Trekking the World. They've got that Kickstarter going on. And then we backed Honey Buzz Fall Flavors. And so those are the
nice.
Yeah, we love the Honey Buzz game.
Yes.
It's a nice mechanic, it's engine building, it's all the things we love.
There's a lot of nice between the worker placement and then the puzzle of the hive itself that you're putting together.
Yeah.
Super fun. But
everything's delayed, so we'll see. Maybe if something comes in for the next podcast, I'll pop it out and do like an opening or something. I am excited about a Kickstarter that I think is coming up.
Okay.
So Game Toppers LLC, Berkey up there in Minnesota. So it's funny, right before so I had backed Table Toppers 2.0. So I was obsessed in the gaming. I was like, oh, this tabletop game, this board game table. Oh, it can be. So I got this tabletop that is 48 by 48, but it's got an expansion. I can make it 48 by 72. Ooh. So it's perfect for D&D, but it's also perfect for board gaming. And I put a lot of Facebook pictures up of our game table under the hashtag #NotBored gaming. So
there you go.
You can always find those if you can check out that hashtag. But they did a Kickstarter last year called Game Toppers 3.0, where they did their normal things, but they added some enhancements. And one of the things they added was legs for your tables. And they came up with a really cool way to put legs on the table, but not the table my size. It was the size just a little bit smaller that I almost backed, but I decided, I'm going to back it. I'm going to get the big one because, I thought that made sense. And they also had a few other things. They put like you can get a dining room tabletop. So if the people who want this to be like their dining room table, they could do that, which I thought was pretty cool.
Okay. That is nice.
So I pinged Berkey and I said, hey, when are you going to come out with legs for this table? And he suggested that that's going to happen in their May Kickstarter. So I'm very excited for that.
Okay.
I would love, because I'm currently got our table set up on these like 2 fold out tables that you got at Target, like the little plastic thing. And not everybody can put their legs under the table because of the way that it blocks. And that's, I know it sounds like a first world problem kind of minor thing, but I'm excited for that to come out because it's just going to up the gaming experience. Because I feel like now we're coming out of the pandemic. We're working on getting back to the game store, but we're also in a place now where we want to invite people over to play games.
Yep.
And I want that to be a good experience, and so that's sort of the thing. And plus I'd like to be able to take it outside, put it out on the deck, set up the legs, and we're on the deck in the night air, or there's a gazebo down at our pool here in the neighborhood, and I think that would be kind of cool to go play out in public like that and just set up the game, because I can set it up really fast because it's a great portable system. Anyway, so that's kind of what I'm thinking about. I don't know if you're excited about anything that's coming up.
Again, sort of head down with the end of the semester, and then the 10-month-old who kind of keeps things moving. So
I totally understand, and I don't envy you. My kids are 27 and 22. I'm at the furthest end of this situation from you that I can possibly be.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's okay. I'm very excited for you, and it's wonderful.
Oh, he's a super fun little dude. So and looking forward to getting him to playing games. We got Wendy playing games when she was super young. So and she's still into it. So it's kind of fun.
So being in the Carolinas, what I've been struck by is that there are a number of game designers that are here in the Carolinas. Sunday Surprise. I should know what that is. I have the game. I just don't have it on my. Anyway, I'm looking it up real fast just to make sure I got Sunday Split. Wow.
Okay.
How bad was that? Holy cow. This is
Sunday Surprise. It sounded sort of intriguing as well. But Sunday Split.
That must be the expansion. Sunday Surprise will be the expansion. I'm kidding. Nate Bivens and Raina Khan. Nate is local to Charlotte, I believe, because I hear he comes in the game store. I can't think if I've actually met him or not, but Sunday Split. But there are other game designers, and it's fun to walk into Carolina Tabletop Games. They have a local game designer section. If I walk into Atomic Empire up in Durham, they have a larger local designer system, because I think when you get around Chapel Hill, Duke, NC State,
all of our TP,
there's a lot of folks in that area. And then when you go to Cape Fear Games in Wilmington, North Carolina, you'll see a lot of like the local designer things. So I'm struck by the fact that there are a lot of game designers in the Carolinas specifically, and in the South in general. Like Parks, 59 Parks is out of Georgia. The publisher, nice. 59 Parks and they've got a new expansion coming called Parks Wildlife that'll be out this summer.
I'm looking forward to that.
Well, what I'm really excited about that is when they did the Parks Trails. You could only get it at Target, and I understand why people do that. I get it. I have no problem with Target. Believe me, I go there a lot. But I love that they have intentionally come out with a release that's going to be geared towards the friendly local game store. Although Barnes and Noble, they have a contract there. It will be on Amazon as well. But I love the fact that they're giving the FGLS community the opportunity to do that, because Parks is one of those games that, I fell in love with it we did a playthrough. We did a playthrough. And I went and, like, we were in the second round, and I got up and I walked over to the shelf, grabbed my copy, and just kind of stashed it under my chair. And my wife looked at me like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm buying this game."
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
So anyway, so hopefully as we move forward, we'll hopefully not only be able to talk about some games that have been made in the South, so to speak, but maybe find a way to invite some of those creators to come and talk to us a little bit about how they got there and what that process was like. But I know we're kind of coming up on time here soon. I just wanted to say, you know, from a first perspective, I'm looking forward to going through this journey with you as we talk about laying on the table. I think not only from the perspective of what it means to us from our friendship, but also sort of what does it mean in our lives as we kind of use this as a mechanism to not only get to know other people, and in your case, educate, but also just kind of how we enrich our own lives through storytelling or through gameplay. And I'm kind of looking forward to continuing this conversation and finding out where this journey takes us. It's a different adventure.
It is. And I am too. I mean, I think it was, you know, we knew each other, sort of ran in similar circles back in college, which is now a ways in the past. But it was just, we hadn't really kept in touch. It wasn't like we were super close buddies. And so it's interesting how just this thing of gaming and play can bring people back together and then get you to interact with each other. I think one of the things that Laura and I are really loving about, playing, and Laura wasn't particularly interested in games before we got together, but one of the things that we really like is, it's Sunday night, it's Monday night, whenever it is. And we could watch something else on a screen, but so much of our lives is taking place on screens.
Right.
We can sit down across from each other and we don't have to make up conversation. We don't have to just talk about the kid or the cats or whatever else. There's something else here in front of us that we can interact with. We can learn a little bit about each other. And then when we walk away, we'll have, as you were saying, a story to tell. And we can talk about the story of what happened, think about the narrative, and keep building from there. And I think games are pretty unique in being able to interact that way and then be able to reflect on it that way. So I'm interested in this adventure as well, and seeing what other stuff we get to talk about, who we get to talk to, and see where it goes.
Well, it's funny when you said that, it occurred to me, there's so much in our lives today that I think are designed to separate people and compartmentalize people. I love the comic strip Pearls Before Swine. Stephen Pastis, he's always talking about how, social media is in many ways as much as a great divisor as it is a great uniter. I mean, and what I love about board games is that it just sort of eliminates all that crap. Yep. It doesn't matter your background. It doesn't matter the way you think. It doesn't matter about who you love. It doesn't matter about any of that stuff. We're all just playing a game. And I love that it focuses on what unites us more than what divides us. And I see that in every single game store I've ever walked into. You see so many folks from so many ilks sitting down and not shouting each other down, and unless the game mechanic calls for that, I suppose. Requires
for shouting, yeah.
But you know what I'm saying. I think it's a great uniter, and that's what I love about this hobby. And I think it's going to be fun to just sort of see that play out, regardless of that, because I think we need more things in our lives these days that unite us. It shouldn't be that way. So I'm excited about that. So I think that's pretty much all the time we have for today. For those that are actually listening to this, we thank you for that. We hope to be publishing this on a pretty consistent basis. I think from our plan is to try to do it every 2 weeks.
That sounds right.
There may be a week lag in between the time we actually do it and it gets released because of just editing and stuff in real life. And, James has got a 10-month-old and, I have a job that kind of, there's a reason why
makes you do stuff.
Yeah, I know. There's a reason why I have like 10 episodes of our podcast of the game that's still not put out, because I just haven't had the time to sit down and do the stuff, editing it. So I got to work on that too. Anyway, so we look forward to to putting these out on a regular basis. We thank you for joining us today for Lay It on the Table. I am Joe Mahaffey, one of your hosts.
I am James Engelhart, the other host.
And we look forward to talking to you again on Lay It on the Table. And remember, folks, we are not bored. We are board gaming. Thanks.
See ya.